What's up guys, CJ from Team Millennium Ninja here, back once again to talk about the Kenichi manga. Now last time I covered the differences between the manga and the anime, and this time we'll be diving headfirst into Kenichi's first manga only arc, the D of D tournament. Now tournament arcs have a long and storied tradition in shonen, being a great way for newer stories to really cut their teeth and show the unique things that they can bring to the table, being used to great effect in some classic anime and manga like Dragon Ball, which really started the trend of tournament arcs in shonen, as well as other great stories like Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter, to even Naruto, One Piece, and My Hero Academia, all putting their own unique spins on it. So today we'll be taking a look at Kenichi's tournament and seeing how it stands up to the grand tradition. But before we start, we're going to need to backtrack a little bit because this arc starts with the Ryo Zanpaku team about to leave for the tournament. But as they leave, the Shinpaku Alliance shows up to come along, which also happened at the end of the OVAs. What the OVAs didn't cover, however, was Nijima obtaining the information by spying on Ryo Zanpaku and relaying it to the rest of the members of the Shinpaku Alliance, with us getting to see their individual reactions to the news. Something I actually appreciated a lot, giving us a little snapshot into their training, like Thor, who we haven't seen at all throughout the build up to this arc due to him training in the mountains, as well as Kisara and Freya, who had already been established to be training together, with Nijima even playing a melody to summon Siegfried, who had gone to Tibet for training, though unfortunately he doesn't show up at the docks with the rest of the members, all of whom proclaim their desire to come along with Kenichi and the others to fight alongside him in the tournament, which is actually a pretty touching moment that goes to show how far Kenichi has come from the beginning of the series, going from a loser who has to read a book on how to make friends to someone who through his willpower and determination has changed the lives of the people he's encountered for the better and made true friends that would follow him to hell and back. However, in an effort to protect them, the Masters decide to leave the Shinpaku Alliance behind. Luckily for them though, Tanimoto just happens to be there with his boat and decides to take the Shinpaku crew with him to the island where the tournament's being held, but not because he likes them or anything. Man, gotta love Tsundere Hermit. Now, having mentioned that, the tournament is on an island. Something I want to note is similar to the Dark Tournament from Yu Yu Hakusho, which no doubt influenced this arc a great deal. Mostly that the tournament's on an island, it's a series of one-on-one team fights with up to 5 members, as well as the main character's team being invited as special guests, unable to really refuse, and staying in a fancy hotel on the island with wealthy underworld benefactors in attendance. But that's about where the similarities end, as the teams can be up to 5, but not required, unlike the Dark Tournament, as well as the rules being less and more restrictive at times, depending on the referee, who's very flippant and prefers to do what's more entertaining in a given circumstances, which more often than not ends up helping the protagonist team rather than hurting, which is kind of a shame in a way, as I feel it's more interesting to watch a struggle against impossible odds, where it seems that everyone is against the good guys, making it that much sweeter when they come out on top. And speaking of the Dark Tournament, think of the fight between Team Urameshi and the Ninjas. It was such an interesting and memorable battle because of all the ruling bullshit that the team's manager forced on the heroes, ending with a triumphant victory by the super underdog Kuwabara, the only fight he won in the whole tournament besides Elder Toguro, by the way. Just thought I'd mention that as an example because in my opinion, one of the first things a tournament arc needs to be great is some clear-cut rules, something that I think this arc fails in a bit, as I'm never quite sure what the basic rules are, and with the way they're portrayed with the referee they choose, the rules of the tournament are quite fluid, which is somewhat frustrating. But to see why, let's take a look at Dragon Ball's World Martial Arts Tournament as an example, the gold standard for shonen tournaments. In the very first tournament, we're made explicitly clear what the rules are. One-on-one fights. If one fighter is knocked down for a 10 count, which can be as long or short as the plot demands, or if they're knocked out of the ring, they lose the match. If not, they continue fighting until someone does, and the use of weapons is not permitted. Pretty cut and dry and easy to understand, but also not impossible to bend, as Akira Toriyama is able to demonstrate throughout the series, with examples like Goku using the flying Nimbus to save himself from being thrown out of the ring, with it later being deemed ineligible to use again. And the same applies to the Dark Tournament, which I already mentioned, whose rules can be described succinctly as a fight to the death with teams of 5v5, where team leaders agree on the method of fighting beforehand, and all 5 members are not required except for in the last match. As well, teams are allowed one and only one substitution, and only when a member dies, and any fighter who's outside of the ring for longer than a 10 count will be disqualified. And in both of these examples, fighting outside of the ring is not allowed. It's pretty simple to understand, and like I mentioned before with the ninja fight, has lots of room for unique circumstances to arise within the rules. Now let's contrast these with the rules of the D of D, where the competition takes place with teams of up to 5 members. Using weapons is allowed, I guess, but what constitutes a weapon isn't made clear. Could someone just bring a gun into the ring, for example? And fighting outside the ring is allowed apparently, as we'll see once we get into the fights. And teams can substitute members whenever they want, I guess, shown by the Shinpaku Alliance using all different members in fights 1 and 2. And I think Matsuna is expecting the reader to be familiar with the typical rules of a tournament like Dragon Ball or Yu Yu Hakusho's, which by the time Kenichi was being written is a fair fair assumption to make, but writing like that only leaves the audience simple questions like these, ones that could have been easily answered and the story wouldn't suffer any more or less from it. Because the rules of a tournament are more than just set up for the backdrop of a tournament, it's also to let the audience know how they should be feeling in given situations. Like say for example, somebody's getting knocked out of the ring. Now in Dragon Ball and Yu Yu Hakusho, that's a tense moment because if they get knocked out of the ring, they have the potential to lose. But contrast that with Kenichi, where if somebody's getting knocked out of the ring, I don't know what's gonna happen. They could lose, they could just be able to get back into the ring. So instead of being invested and feeling the tension, I'm waiting for the referee to chime in to let me know what's gonna happen, which isn't tense, it's annoying to break up a fight that you're currently invested in to explain a rule that you could have just known beforehand. Because every story is always somebody's first experience with something. And the last rule I can make out is the types of fights, e.g. 1-on-1, 2v2, 5v5, etc., is apparently decided by the referee, which is kind of weird as a martial arts tournament, as it means the teams wouldn't be able to fight the way they prepared. So already the tournament isn't looking so great with a somewhat nebulous set of rules, but every tournament has a story, so let's take a look at the plot, which is where I think this arc shines the most. Arriving at the island, the Ryo Zanpaku crew meet Jinny, a petite blonde woman in charge of the island security, who also seems to know Sakaki, providing some intrigue to be expounded upon later. And we get an idea of the island's defenses from the Ryo Zanpaku tour, immediately seeing them in action as the Shinpaku Alliance is bombarded by them while trying to enter the island, ending with everyone abandoning ship. Everyone except Tanimoto, who stays on board to draw the fire away from the others, but he doesn't get far before the boat explodes, with no trace of him to be found afterwards. Damn. Too bad he's really for real dead. He was one of my favorite characters, man. And be killed off so unceremoniously? Fuck! But later on that night, the introduction to the tournament is held at a fancy party, where a representative from Yami, one of the One Shadow Nine Fists, Diego Carlos, takes the reins as referee and master of ceremonies for the event. And I don't think I mentioned it in my last video, so I'm just gonna go over Yami here real quick. Yami means darkness in Japanese, and Kenichi is an underground group of martial arts masters that practice the killing fist style, which contrasts against Ryo Zanpaku's fist of lifestyle. Yami's organization is run by the One Shadow Nine Fists, which consists of 9 individual martial arts masters who each practice their own unique martial arts, kind of like the evil version of Ryo Zanpaku. And Yomi is Yami's disciple group, where the disciples of the masters within Yami are supposed to prove themselves before being able to enter the ranks of Yami. And now with all that covered, let's get back to the party, where Diego begins giving us the rundown of how the tournament works, which isn't very sufficient, as I've already covered, until he's interrupted by the Shinpaku Alliance crashing the party to announce their entrance into the tournament, which Diego allows because of their showmanship. As their own team though, and since Kenichi's on the Ryo Zanpaku team, he can't be on theirs. But they have all their other major players besides Siegfried and Hermit, as well as Freya joining them now, so I'm sure they'll be fine. And the next day, the tournament begins with the Shinpaku Alliance fighting first, and I think this is a great place to mention the second thing that I think makes a great tournament arc, the characters. Because tournament arcs are unique arcs in the way that they let you introduce a whole bunch of characters at once, be they new characters or old characters that haven't had much development, and really focus in on them much more than you normally would in other arcs. Let's take the Chunin exams from Naruto as an example. This arc really excels in this field, introducing a whole range of interesting characters, from interesting new villains like Gaara and the other Sand Ninja, as well as Orochimaru, to fleshing out older characters we had hardly seen before like Shikamaru, Hinata, and Kiba, as well as other new interesting characters like Rockley and Neji, and giving a whole lot of development to these characters within the arc and even after, with some of them even going on to become fan favorite characters. And the same goes for One Piece's Koreda Coliseum portion of the Dressrosa arc, which single-handedly introduced and showed off all the characters that would end up making the Straw Hat Grand Fleet at the end of the arc, long before we even knew that would be a possibility. Even My Hero Academia does this pretty well in their tournament arc, and remember what My Hero Academia does? It sucks. So looking back at Kenichi, you might think it would do pretty well in this area. After all, one of the strong points of the Ragnarok saga was establishing new interesting characters and developing them pretty well over the course of a couple fights. As well, you might think with everything that happened between the end of the Ragnarok saga and the start of the tournament that it would be more Yomi and Yami centric, bringing in members of Yomi we'd already been introduced to like Lee Raichi and Boris Ivanov, and expanding on them some more, as well as introducing and fleshing out more members of Yomi, which unfortunately is not the case, with the only Yomi representation in the tournament being Castor and Pollux, who we did meet before but didn't get to know super well, so they're probably the best members to have here out of the ones we know. But aside from them and the two protagonist teams, the rest of the tournament roster is filled up with completely new characters. most of which unfortunately show little to no interesting character, mostly being walls for the protagonist to overcome instead, with some exceptions that we'll get to as we go through the plot. But this first team that fights against the Shinpaku Alliance is not one of them, being a team of young Special Forces soldiers, which, to be fair, makes sense in not being as interesting, as they're supposed to be portrayed as emotionless killers with no background, but that doesn't really take away from the fact that the fights themselves aren't that interesting due to this characterization. And they fight the Shinpaku in a series of one-on-one fights, with the first fighter up from our heroes being Mizunuma. That's right, Mizunuma takes on the first fight of the tournament, and if you had told me that before I read the manga, I would have said, who? But after rereading up to this point, this fight is a great little cap off to Mizunuma's arc that's been going on throughout the background of the series so far, and he fares pretty well in the fight at first, but ultimately loses and is beaten pretty badly, though this ends up rallying the spirits of the Shinpaku Alliance. And up next we have Takeda, who steps in the ring to avenge Mizunuma, finally being able to show the results of his training under his new master, which seems less than satisfactory, as he's not faring very well at first. However, it was due to his arrogance, trying to fight in a brace he had on for training, not really helping the case with his dark tournament comparisons, which once removed makes this fight very one-sided in Takeda's favor. And after Takeda's victory, an uproar is caused on the other team's side, with the other members telling the one who lost to correct his mistake. Oh, so they can have guns. Luckily for them though, they're stopped by Kenichi, which leads to a fight outside the ring, and Thor taking out the rest of the team aside from the captain outside of the ring, which Diego as the referee allows, taking away a lot of the gravitas of the bout, as the only tournament fight remaining is the final fight between the captain of the team and Freya, with him using wire traps as a weapon, as well as the stage transforming into a maze-like area, making it easier to set the wires up and harder to avoid them, though Freya ends up coming out on top thanks to her family's special staff techniques. And as I stated earlier, there isn't really much to talk about in terms of the other team's character, but this fight was still interesting in the way that it showed off the characters of Mizunuma and Freya, with all the buildup of Mizunuma's character from before culminating in a pretty cool moment for him, as well as us getting to know Freya more, as she's someone we haven't gotten to spend a whole lot of time with, even back during the Ragnarok saga. And this arc finally shows her off in a less serious, more friendly demeanor, which makes me love her character and inclusion here. And the next fight of import is between the Muay Thai Typhoon team and a mysterious teenager by the name of Garyu X, another standout character from this arc, who seems to be quite powerful for his young age, taking out the first member of the Muay Thai team quickly, and also outing a masterclass fighter who disguised himself within the team of teens, who he also takes out with ease, making Garyu X a very interesting character, and a dangerous one at that. And now that he's moving on to the next round, Kenichi might have to face him soon, so hopefully he'll have what it takes to overcome this mysterious foe. Speaking of though, Kenichi won't make it to the next round unless he wins his first match, which is against a team of 3 Chinese martial artists who introduced themselves at the party the night before, and it turns out that they have a grudge against Kensei and by proxy Kenichi, so they seek to defeat him in the tournament to prove that their martial arts are the greatest in all of China. And this is a pretty hard fought battle for the duo of Kenichi and Miyu, who have to fight 2-on-3 against the Chinese team as per the referee's decision, something that seems like a hindrance but actually turns out to be in the favor of Kenichi and Miyu in the end. But the beginning is rough for the two, with the Chinese team using attacks that seem undodgeable even to Miyu, though they eventually come out with a victory thanks to improvements on both Kenichi and Miyu's parts, as well as Kenichi's insane level of durability. And the Chinese team was kind of interesting. By that I mean their leader was kind of interesting, with his whole motivation pretty much being that he was jealous of Kenichi for being Kensei's disciple, since he regretted turning him down when Kensei offered to be his master. And before I move on, one thing I want to mention about this part of the story that I really enjoy is Miyu's involvement, as before she couldn't really participate in a lot of fights due to her being so far ahead of Kenichi, but now that they're closer in strength, we could see Miyu be more active than she's been up to this point, which is great not just for her character but also for the choreography, as Miyu has a very unique fighting style with a ton of interesting moves. And after that, the only real fight of note is of an innocuous looking suit and tie wearing young businessman who ends up beating a whole team by himself in a surprising upset. And clearly there's more to him than meets the eye, as it also turns out he's looking for Ogata Ishinsai, or the Great Sage Fist, for supposedly revenge, it seems, though ambiguous for now as he leaves once he finds out Ogata isn't on the island. And during all the tournament matches, we also see Sakaki sneak away for a bit in order to scout out the island for the master's mysterious plan, and this is where he meets up with Jenny, the head security guard girl from earlier, and she calls him her fiance. As it turns out, Sakaki and Jenny's dad were close friends, so he's known her since she was young, and she admired him as a young girl, that being where the fiance thing comes from. And as it also turns out, she's a member of the CIA, who took the job as island security in order to open the way for an attack on the island, doing so personally as she has a personal grudge against Fortuna himself, being the one who killed her father. So Sakaki and Jenny team up to take down the island security security and free Jenny's imprisoned subordinates, with Shigure also joining them along the way, setting the stage for the attack to come later. And after that, with the matches concluded for the day, Kenichi wakes up after falling unconscious following his match, being filled in on what happened afterwards, and that the rest of the Shinpaku Alliance are in the midst of more training, as after seeing the competition, they're kind of nervous for the next bouts to come. It's also at this time that Sho Kano makes his appearance on the island in order to take Miyu away with him, but this time she refuses, exchanging his earring back for her beret, something Sho doesn't take too well as he knocks her out and takes her with him. But Kenichi saw it all and is in hot pursuit when Sho sends his bodyguards to stop Kenichi, who fares pretty well against them, though he's in no condition for it after his fight. And with them attacking a down Kenichi, he's saved by a mysterious person in a wheelchair, who turns out to be Ryuto, which is a pretty cool reveal, although Kenichi doesn't have time to really dwell on it with Sho getting away with Miyu. Luckily for him, Sho runs into the Shinpaku Alliance in the midst of their training in the courtyard. Unluckily for them, however, as they try to stop him from taking Miyu, only to be ruthlessly dispatched by Sho, who nearly kills Takeda in the process. But Takeda is able to awaken Miyu, who comes out in a berserker-like state, attacking Sho and Kenichi once he catches up, though Kenichi's able to calm Miyu down the only way he knows how, with Kensei's secret technique, the reach around titty grab, one of my favorite techniques as well. Takes a lot of practice though. After that, Kenichi and Sho have a little fight, if you could even call it that. It basically ends with Kenichi stopping one of his punches, and with that, Sho puts off their fight for now and takes his leave, with both of them vowing to defeat the other the next time they fight. And this was a nice little break from the tournament, bringing Sho back in and really setting him up as Kenichi's new main rival. Also exploring his and Miyu's connection a little more and showing off Miyu in her berserker state, something we had never seen before and a very interesting new development for her character. And after such a raucous and chaotic night, the next day starts off equally chaotic, with the first team to fight being Castor and Pollux, where we learn a bit more about the two, like how Castor tries to be as entertaining as possible while she fights. Meanwhile, her brother Pollux tries to win as efficiently as possible per his master's instruction, also revealing he has a different master than Diego. But the two win their fight pretty handedly in a sort of anticlimactic way, which prompts Castor to call out Kenichi, saying that he's ruined her and her brother's lives, and a move straight out of pro wrestling in order to get the crowd excited again, which I think was great and is something that makes me start to really like Castor. It also prompts Kenichi to run out of the stadium, where he happens to run past Tanimoto, who's met back up with his master Sogetsu on the island, who takes him back under his wing as his disciple again, after earning his respect with him having now also faked his death. And afterwards is the Ryo Zanpaku team's next fight, with Kenichi being pitted against the mysterious teenager Garyu X, who ends up fighting them more like he's training them, using some impressive techniques to do so, like saying two different things at once and fighting like both sides of his body are completely separate, ending with Kenichi learning a new form of Seikuken, Ryusui Seikuken, ultimately using it to land a hit on Garyu, which breaks his mask and finally reveals his face. And in a crazy twist, it turns out to be the Elder. Oh, no wonder he was so strong. And with Kenichi and Miyu's fight complete, next up is the Shinpaku team versus the Capoeira team. But with all of the heavy hitters of the Shinpaku Alliance incapacitated besides Kisara, Nijima is in a frenzy trying to decide what to do, with forfeiting being foremost on his list of options. However, he's convinced by Kisara and Ukida to let them fight, so they prepare to enter the ring. But it's at this point in the manga where we get some flashes of Siegfried looking for the gang back home, only for him to show up at the island now, in a scene that really makes me sad this part of the manga wasn't animated. Streaking through the sky in a biplane that gets shot down by the island's defenses as he jumps out, dodging missiles on his way down and landing in the stadium to join the team in their fight against the Capoeira team. And I could only imagine what an animated version of this with a decent budget would look like. It could be so awesome. Alas though, we'll probably never get to see that glory. But with Siegfried's arrival, Nijima's confidence is bolstered, and armed with one of his cunning strategies, they enter the ring, where Nijima tries to sow some seeds of discord among the enemy team, and asks Ukida to give up his life as he's the weakest among the fighters, having him charge straight at the captain of the team, where he proceeds to get destroyed by the whole team, leaving Nijima to announce the plan failed, causing the rest of the fighters to break out into chaos. But it turns out to have been all a part of Nijima's plan to begin with, as Ukida gets back up to throw a distracted fighter from the ring, basically evening out the team structure as Ukida is unable to continue fighting anymore. But that's okay, because Siegfried shows off the results of his training, becoming Super Siegfried.
And this
What's he doing?
is to go even further beyond.
with the capoeira team unable to defeat him, though after taking out 2 of the members, he succumbs to his fatigue from trying to find the members of the alliance non-stop for the last couple of days, leaving Kisara to fight off the remaining 2 by herself, which she does after incorporating Miyu's movements that she's seen before into her own fighting style, capping off this fight with a win by the Shinpaku. And I definitely enjoyed this fight a lot more than the first fight, with the capoeira team at least being somewhat more interesting than the special forces team, though not by much, with it ultimately coming down to Kisara versus the captain, who acts stoic and overconfident, much like the captain of the special forces team did, though the fighting itself was more interesting this time around, with the Shinpaku having to rely on the backup team, making for a more uphill battle. And speaking of which, the last thing that I think makes a great tournament arc would obviously be great fights, something this arc definitely succeeds in, with a great mix of interesting fighting styles and choreography throughout, with every fight in the tournament having something unique to enjoy about it, even if some of the new characters do make things kind of stale. Meanwhile, during the Shinpaku Alliance's fight, Miyu ends up meeting with Ryuto, who tells her something interesting about Sho's past, being that he was born in a village of ninjas, as a special baby that's supposedly bred to be a ninja and bought by Yame to become the ultimate martial artist, being called a Kurimisago, a term Miyu notes sounds familiar, with the most likely case being she was one as well. And after her talk with Ryuto, her and Kenichi run into the Pancration team, who are some of the more interesting characters introduced in the arc, with the leader's interactions with Kenichi shedding light on that despite their appearance, they're actually nice people who don't really want to fight but were forced to by Fortuna, who would kill them if they refused. So they're trying to use an opportunity during the tournament to escape. And after they explain their plan to Kenichi, he asks them to wait to use whatever the masters are planning as a distraction for their escape. But after Kenichi and Miyu leave, Sho appears, and the next time we see him, he enters the ring announcing he killed the Pancration team, taking their place in the tournament with the intention of fighting Kenichi, and beating a team single-handedly with ease, leaving 4 teams left in the tournament: the Ryo Zanpaku team, Sho, Caster and Pollux, and the Shinpaku Alliance, who immediately forfeit per Nijima's decision, as he says it would gain them nothing at great risk to themselves, leaving 3 left in the tournament, with the next bout to be between the Ryo Zanpaku team and Caster and Pollux, until Sho orders them to forfeit too so he can fight Kenichi, which causes some infighting between Caster and Sho. That is until a full-scale military invasion interrupts them, and with everyone else leaving the stadium to flee to safety, Kenichi and Sho remain to fight the final match of the tournament. And while I might have felt that the main tournament felt a bit lackluster, I will say that this climax is absolutely epic, with it being maybe the best Kenichi ever gets. Especially in terms of choreography and artwork, the fight between Kenichi and Sho is absolutely beautiful, as well as the invasion of the island, where we get to see the masters taking down battalions of soldiers and even tanks with their bare hands, as well as the Shinpaku Alliance not being ones to let Kenichi steal the show. They take on Fortuna, who is revealed to be a master level fighter, someone even combined that they couldn't beat, especially in the weakened state that most of their members are in. But combined together with Tanimoto, they're able to defeat him thanks to some of Sogetsu's latest training. An impressive feat to be sure, even if it is revealed that Fortuna was barely even master level. But with all that taken care of and escape secured, the last thing left is for Kenichi to beat Sho, which won't be easy as the fight begins with Sho nearly killing Kenichi, with the only thing saving him being Shigure's chainmail vest. And every time Kenichi seems to get the upper hand, Sho is able to sweep the rug out from under him, until he's able to activate his Ryusui Seikuken, taking this fight to the next level, where Kenichi and Sho have to go back and forth with their techniques they've learned from various different masters, with this being the first time Kenichi's ever fought an opponent like himself. And with Sho having the upper hand, he denounces Ryo Zanpaku's teachings as being too soft. A real original concept for this manga as well, might I add. Seriously, I love this manga, but pretty much every fight comes down to the same thing. And as Sho's denouncing Ryo Zanpaku's teachings, we get a flashback to a time when Sho's master was being questioned about his leniency, ordering Sho to kill a bird he had with him on the spot, which Sho does. Or at least seems to, as we find out later that Sho actually has a good side to him, not actually killing the bird in the flashback, and also not actually killing the Pancration team like he claimed earlier, which is a bit of a backstep, I feel, as well. I thought the Pancration team was interesting in this arc. Having read the manga before, I know they won't come back up in the story again, which makes it feel like kind of a waste of Sho's potential to be a great villain, rather than redeeming him like they do to make him more of a sympathetic antagonist, which is a fine way to go. But by this point in Kenichi, it's become so tired, as it seems every antagonist takes this route of being redeemed by the end of the fight, with the only real exception so far being Ryuto, and even then it doesn't seem like the case with his appearance in this arc. So I would have much preferred if they had taken Sho in a more villainous direction, especially the way the fight ends. Though despite having that good side to him, he still doesn't show Kenichi any mercy, as he uses the same technique Ryuto used during his and Kenichi's fight. This time, however, it's been perfected by Ogata, thanks to the information he obtained from Ryuto using it. A revelation that infuriates Kenichi, now knowing that Yami Yami were the ones behind what had happened to his friend previously. And while he's fighting back against Sho, his movements have become even better, it seems. Though it turns out not because of his anger, as Sho finally realizes he's lost consciousness and is fighting purely on instinct, which Sho compares to Yami's heartless style of fighting, as he's fighting on pure instinct without any conscience. Something Kenichi rebuts, saying that this is the result of his masters pouring their love into training him, rather than them having destroyed people to obtain power, which leads us into the final leg of the fight, where Sho uses his finishing move on Kenichi, who barely manages to avoid it and counter with his signature move, the Mubiyoshi, putting Sho down for good, or so it seems, but he's able to get back up for one last attack, which Kenichi's able to dodge thanks to his friends warning him and cheering him on. But it's not quite over yet, as a soldier pops up from behind Kenichi and shoots at him, which Miyu jumps in front of him to block, but the person who actually gets shot is Sho, who jumped in front of Miyu to protect her, and the arc ends with Sho telling Kenichi that he has to protect Miyu no matter what before he dies, which is a pretty dramatic ending and one I definitely didn't see coming, as up until this point death has been very rare in Kenichi, with it only happening once before back when Kenichi fought Jihan, who to say charitably had much less focus on him than Sho did, so it was a much less jarring revelation than Sho's death, especially after having taken the last two arcs to develop Sho so much. I personally would have thought that he would have been an in-game rival to Kenichi, but I think his death here has more significance moving forward than if he were to survive, as usually when Kenichi defeats villains he recruits them to his side, which by the end of the fight seemed incredibly likely from what we learned about Sho. And while it's something I would have liked to see, with Sho maybe even continuing to be a romantic rival of Kenichi, I think his death here is more of a sign of the increased stakes and danger moving forward for Kenichi, with Kenichi realizing himself that he has to continue getting even stronger in order to keep the promise he made to Sho and to Miyu. And so that does it for the D of D. An interesting arc to be sure, even if it didn't really make for the best tournament, as I feel this arc could have had many different settings other than a tournament and still have pulled off what they wanted to accomplish with it, with the tournament mainly being used as a backdrop to explain multiple fights with minimal effort, as well as trying to build hype based purely on the fact that it was a tournament, rather than trying to use the tournament setting to its full advantage. But after we get past the first round and Sho appears, the arc really gets going, with him and the Master's Plan completely overshadowing the tournament by the end. But the tournament does give us some interesting moments and some pretty awesome fights, and while it doesn't really accomplish what a standard tournament usually sets out to do of introducing new characters and developing them for use later on, besides a couple of characters like Castor and Pollux, one thing it does do, however, is really focus in on some of the main characters that we haven't got to spend a lot of time with, like Miyu, Freya, and Ukida, and give them some time to shine and develop more. So I appreciate this arc for that, if nothing else. And I'm really excited to see where the manga goes from here, because this is where my memory starts to get pretty fuzzy, as I haven't read it in a while, and I can't wait to dive back into it. But before that, did you know there was another Kenichi manga written by Shun Matsuna? That's right, it was one he made before this version of Kenichi got picked up by a bigger magazine. And so I hope you guys will join me next time when I take a look at the first Kenichi manga. Make sure you subscribe because you won't want to miss it. And this has been CJ from Team Millennium Ninja, headed back to the village, hidden in the internet.